Hi everyone, my name is Sahil. My primary topic was sleep disorders. My subtopic was fatal familial insomnia. A sleep disorder is a medical condition in which a person isn't able to get the right type of sleep or the right amount of each type of sleep. And this could be due to anything from restless leg syndrome to insomnia or sleep apnea. And some causes for these are just general stress, day-to-day stress, psychological factors, genetics, or even just their general lifestyle habits or their environment could be also factors for this. So fatal familial insomnia is a subset of Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, and all three listed here, fatal familial insomnia, Creutzfeldt-Jakob, and progressive supranuclear palsy are all a type of prion protein disease, which takes place in the brain. And all three of these have very similar symptoms, which is why their fatal familial insomnia also usually gets a misdiagnosis of one of the other two. Some key differences are key points are that fatal familial insomnia is genetic, whereas the other two are not, and all three are incurable. But fatal familial insomnia usually ends in paralysis, and people tend to die within about 11 months. Creutzfeldt-Jakob, the symptoms are generally similar to dementia, and people can get them from beef that has been contaminated, and people also die within about a year. And progressive supranuclear palsy is generally a loss of muscle or organ control, and that usually leads in death in the end. So, fatal familial insomnia is a genetic prion disease as opposed to the other two. And the first case that was recorded was in the 1700s of a middle aged doctor who had symptoms similar to this. He was unable to sleep, and in the end, he was fully paralyzed before he died. Despite this, the disease itself was not really documented or noted until the 1980s when another doctor was diagnosed with similar symptoms and died the same way. And the researchers were discovered that the doctor who died in the 1980s, his lineage could be traced back to the doctor from the 1700s, and that's where the discovery that it was a genetic disease was made. And so it's a very rapid disease with people dying very quickly from it or being affected very quickly due to being unable to sleep. And from the testing that has been done, they've found that both sedatives and tranquilizers are virtually ineffective against it. They don't really do much to help or alleviate the patient's pain. And people will usually end up with very bad hallucinations or just even in a coma in the last few months before they die. And at the moment, it's because of how new it is, they're still developing new types of ways to uh, identify fatal familial insomnia specifically over other types. And so a few points about this were that it can activate itself anywhere between the ages of 18 and 50. However, current data shows that it's usually between 38 and 50. And what it is the prion proteins attack nerve cells in the thalamus part of the brain, which are responsible for controlling your sleep. So there's a cycle of sleep, which is your light sleep, deep sleep, and REM, and it's just a cycle. And the proteins attack the nerve cells responsible for maintaining that cycle. So as it progresses and there are fewer and fewer nerve cells, people are able to sleep less and less, and their condition gets worse and worse. And so some procedures that are being developed now to help prevent misdiagnoses are using new exclusion criteria, for example. So there's certain biomarkers that have been used to separate Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease symptoms from fatal familial insomnia, and being able to differentiate those two is huge because fatal familial insomnia usually gets misdiagnosed because of how rare it is. And by creating these new testing procedure, researchers and scientists may be able to study patients who have it for a longer period of time, which would hopefully make it easier or better to understand in the future. And another methodology of testing that they're planning on implementing is a polysomnogram test, which measures brain activity, eye movements, respiratory breathing activity, and it also records the patient, and so that way they can correlate the electrical signals with the movements that the person is making, and hopefully be able to develop some kind of pattern and apply that across other people and say definitively whether somebody has fatal familial insomnia based on the type of electrical signals and movements that they're making. And some of the reasons it's difficult to diagnose is because it's a subset of Creutzfeldt-Jakob, so some of the symptoms are overlapping. And one example is that a patient was misdiagnosed with depression because they had a progressive memory decline and were sometimes struggling with sleeping. They were given a variety of medication, but none of them were that effective. And eventually he passed away. And another difficult aspect is that because of how rare it is, there isn't enough data to establish a pattern. For example, the disease can run from 7 to 72 months is what we've recorded so far, but on average it's 11 to 13. But that's from a very small subset. That's from a very small data pool, and so it's hard to make a conclusive statement from that. And here are my citations, and thanks for listening.